This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I'm sitting up here at the Summerhill LCBO, and it appears there is a train travelling above our heads on its way somewhere. I'm sitting here with Stuart Pym, who is the winemaker for Suckfizzle, Scuttlebutt, and Stella Bella in Margaret River, Australia. How are you today, sir?
I'm not bad. Pretty good, actually.
Now, if you wouldn't mind telling our viewers a little bit about yourself and the wineries that you make wine for.
Okay, I guess myself, I've just slipped into my 50th year this year, but I believe 50 is the new...
Recently?
Or April.
Alright, so no happy birthdays for you.
No, it's too late, and I'm comfortable with it now. I've been making wine since 1980, or in the wine industry since 1983, but also had a stint in microbreweries in that time as well, so for 6 years in the mid to late 80s. Back in Margaret River from 1991, grew up in Perth, so I'm Western Australian pretty well through and through. Studied wine making a long time ago, and now I've worked for a few companies, but now work for Stella Bella, which is the umbrella company of the three brands you mentioned. Within that we have our top single vineyard wine, Suckfizzle, which is grown on my own vineyard. There's the Stella Bella range of wines, and then there is the Scuttlebutt range of wines, which are sort of our entry-level, everyday, more affordable drinking ones.
So Suckfizzle has always come from your own vineyards?
Yes, since we took the vineyard on in 1996, so 1997 was the first vintage. It was a 10-year-old vineyard then, so it's 20 and a bit years old now.
So all of those Suckfizzle wines that my father was going crazy about a few years back all came from your vineyards?
Yep.
Fantastic. Do you hear that, Dad? So tell me a little bit about the different the philosophies behind the three different labels.
I guess as briefly mentioned, Scuttlebutt, they're always blended wines because that's a lot of Australian history, and Australia has always blended wines, I guess, to make wines. So positive attributes of one variety work with the positive attributes of other varieties, where the sum ends up being greater than the whole. But I guess you're not getting the specific characters of grape varieties themselves. The Scuttlebutt range is, as I mentioned, our everyday drinking styles, and we try and work on blends that are classic to certain regions. The Scuttlebutt White is a blend of Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon, and that blend has become synonymous and a signature wine style of Margaret River and then Western Australia as a greater whole. It's all tank fermented, it's about being bright and fruity and zesty, and I often say Margaret River in a bottle because it's ideally reminding you of the blue skies, white sands, blue water, and bright sunshine you get from the Margaret River region.
Do you see that sort of hitting the same kind of price point demographic as, say, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, those Margaret River wines have been around longer than New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, and I guess as a pointer to that, the guy that started Cloudy Bay, which really on Montana, which started the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc thing, came from Margaret River. David Honan came from Cape Mentel and went to New Zealand and set up Cloudy Bay, so I blame him for that. What we call a savalanche.
The savalanche?
Yeah, all these New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs coming in.
And has that affected the market of Sauvignon Blanc Semillon blends?
Yes, it certainly has. And there's various ways to manage that, but really the way the price point's coming down on Sauvignon Blanc, it's very hard for us to maintain any level of profitability. So we need to pitch ourselves as an alternative to those Sauvignon Blancs. And I guess we like to think when people tire of the cheaper Sauvignon Blancs, so I think there are some stunning New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs, but at the lower price points, I think some of them are bright and fruity, but somewhat simplistic. We'd like to think they can progress on to the Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blends, where you're getting a few more flavour profiles. And
more the kind of Bordeaux type, as opposed to that kind of less of the kind of freshness and vitality, a little bit more complex, perhaps?
Yeah, but not like a lot of the generic Grave, which I think a lot of them are still pretty ordinary wines, but there are some very smart wines coming out of there.
Yes, yeah. Now, you also make a Scuttlebutt Red and I believe a Rosé.
We do make a Rosé, yes, and that's a blend of Shiraz and Merlot. And I'd be interested to hear from you on your take on what's happening with the rosé market, because I mean, in the last 5 years there's been promises of rosé booming, and it's certainly increased in sales after probably 15 to 20 years in the backwater. But no, I'll be interested to hear what you have to say about rosé and where you think it's going.
I've always been a huge fan of rosé, much to the merriment of my friends. I am happy to drink rosé through the winter, sort of like grabbing. I was just last week speaking about grabbing the last vestiges of summer with enjoying some rosé. And but I tend to drink rosé all year round. I like a very dry style of rosé, a very traditional southern southwestern French style of rosé. I do think I was just tasting for Intervin last week and judging, and we had a flight of rosé, and there were some interesting rosé in there, but there were also some absolutely terrible ones, which you could see were simply byproducts of trying to make another wine.
Yeah.
How do you make your rosé?
Well, interesting question, because when I've worked in Bordeaux in a number of places, and a lot of the rosés that come about are, as you've I think alluded to, the byproduct of the red wine that makes it. They try to concentrate the red wine with a bit of bleed off or saignée, and that's where the rosé comes from. We actually approach our rosé in a rather purist sense.
Okay.
So we actually pick the grapes specifically to be rosé, which means we're picking them earlier than we would be if we were picking those grapes for dry red wine. Because we want to get some of the brighter fruit characters. Now, because we do that, we can't really... Cabernet isn't a choice, because Cabernet picked early does have lots of green herbal notes, which we don't want in the dry red wine and we don't want in the rosé. Hence, we choose Shiraz and Merlot because they have some of the softer red fruity characters. They don't have the same level of tannin that would still come through with the infused Cabernet, and green Cabernet tannin is pretty hard work. So hence those two varieties. We pick them earlier, probably in about the 12.5 Beaumet, where we might pick 13.5 to 14 for the dry red. Pretty much treated as a white wine, except for 12-hour skin contact in the press. After that, it's treated as a white wine. It's tank fermented, everything's the same as white wine.
Do you get any kind of tannic value that comes through to the final product? Is there anything
yeah,
there?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I actually think phenolics are a fairly important part of rosé. I mean, you can't avoid them. If you do, you find the crap out of it. But they're there at the back of the palate, and it's really a matter of getting a balance for that. And I think that balance between the phenolics and how you balance that with fruit flavours and maybe a small amount of sugar, which is undetectable because it's balanced, gives just that slight step up on a white wine palate. I mean, it's not like a Beaujolais or anything, but it's just a stepping out of white wine towards the red wine, and with the aromatics of, say, poached strawberries and red berries and those sort of characteristics, it's actually really attractive. I remember one of the previous companies I worked with, our first rosé came out, this must have been in 2004, I think, and I did a Meet the Winemaker tasting, and I saw all these people standing around swirling the rosé and catching the light, and I thought, they look like party lights. It's just got this pink stuff whirling around. Yeah. It's like a party. It's sort of, it has fun about it.
How much had you had to consume at this point?
I don't think I'd drank much.
All right,
actually. I was obviously bored with the customers, so I was looking around for diversion.
But you don't think that rosé has taken off in the way that some people are speaking of?
I think, say, in 2004, 2005, when I was making those ones, my previous job, the projections were for a boom like that. But no, I think it started off very quick, but it's tapered off. But there's no doubt rosé is still vastly more popular than it was 10 years ago.
Yes, yeah.
And I think some of those sickly sweet ones are probably what killed it in the past. And now I think there are some really, really good rosés out there, and drier in style, but with some interest and some complexity. There's more to rosé than much use.
So you're a scuttlebutt. Your scuttlebutt red. That's a Shiraz Cab blend.
Yeah, in that classic Australian blend of Shiraz and Cabernet. But we're Western Australian. You don't get Barossa Shiraz or McLaren Vale Shiraz characters in our Shiraz characters. We're sort of more medium to full-bodied in weight. We still get some riper blueberry, sort of elderberry characters, but we don't get the really concentrated, intense raisiny nature of the eastern states.
Now, tell me a little bit about the Stella Bella range.
Stella Bella it's the core of our range, which I guess makes sense because that's what we've called the company. We have a wide range of varieties in there, but if we look at them on the amount we produce, there really is the core varieties that the region is known for, which will be Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blend. We do make a straight Sauvignon Blanc in that range. We make Cabernet Sauvignon Merlot because Margaret is strongly associated with Cabernet Sauvignon. And we make Shiraz because Australia's associated with Shiraz. We also then have a few offshoots that we call the exotics, because when we started making them, very few other people in Australia were making them.
What would those be?
Tempranillo, in the reds, Tempranillo. 2003 was our first Tempranillo. Sangiovese Cabernet. 2001 was our first Sangiovese Cabernet. We also make a Viognier, which I think 05 was our first Viognier. And we do actually have a little wine called Pink Muscat, which is in a 375ml bottle. It's made a bit like a Moscato, so it's 7.5% alcohol, quite spritzy, very aromatic from the muscat. We first made that in 2000. There's a lot of Pink Muscats in Australia now.
Yeah. That was a joke there, but I'm not going to make it. And then moving on to Suckfizzle, which is your kind of flagship line.
Yep.
A wine that I know for a fact has gone down incredibly well in the United Kingdom and also in Australia. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I guess that is actually the beginning of the company, when my partner, Janice MacDonald, and myself had this vineyard, and we made the wine. We got the vineyard, grew the grapes, made the wine, bought the barrels, put it in the bottle. I thought, right, that's the easy bit done. Now we've got to get into the marketplace, another brand new wine into the marketplace. And we'd both been making wine for quite a long time for other wine companies historically. And we've always thought there's never been enough fun in wine and there should be more scope for it. And I was reading a book that Janice had called Gargantua and Pantagruel, which is by Rabelais, a 14th century French author, about these journeys of these two great giants all over medieval France, solving problems and making other problems. And one of the sort of the bit players in that book is this great lord Suckfizzle. Is actually having a legal dispute with another great lord that I think is Pantagruel, which is one of the giants, comes in and resolves without having to go to the lawyers. The other great lord was called Great Lord Kiss My Ass, but we felt that wasn't appropriate. So
You're making that up?
No, that's true.
Really? Okay. I was about to say I thought it was called Suckfizzle because it could be phonetically confusing for someone who had had a few glasses. And
some people have done that.
Okay, I'm not surprised at all.
I'm actually surprised. Some people think it's a sparkling wine because it has fizz
right,
in it. That's actually how it came about. Unfortunately, my brother actually is a linguist and works in language. He spoiled the whole story for me by saying, well, that translated view, it's written in French, that person who's translated that has chosen those names. Because they were the absolute original ones. They've been translated in some manner, but
translated with a bit of a sense of humour.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any point in letting the facts get in the way of a good story.
Okay. Now, how do you feel... I've spoken and written many times about the state of the Australian wine industry over the last little while. What's going on?
What's going on? Well, I guess, as mentioned, I first started in the industry in '83, so I've seen a bit of the industry over the times, and we had, I think, the late '80s were actually the last really bad time. We had the vine pull, where people were pulling 100-year-old Grenache and Shiraz in South Australia.
Which doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
No, but I've got to say, prior to that, they used to be turned into sparkling white wine down at Great Western.
Bloody hell, right.
Like Minchinbury and cheap stuff. No, it's in the toughest time I've ever seen it in that time at the moment. Probably largely our own doing. But yeah, there's a surplus of fruit, there's a surplus of wine. The good vineyards are still the good vineyards, there's no surplus of them. It's really a matter of, I think, some rationalisation happening at a vineyard resource level, where we had a bit of a boom of planting in the late 90s and very early 2000s with some tax incentive schemes, which I think put a lot of vineyards where they perhaps shouldn't be.
In any parts of Australia?
Oh, in every part of Australia.
Right. Oh, really? Okay. I always hear a couple of names that sort of fall to the table.
In Western Australia there are some.
Really?
In Adelaide Hills there are some. There's probably none of those in the Riverland, but really they're all over. I think those particular schemes are being resolved as we speak. With there are some financial crises in some of those management investments.
Yes, I would imagine so. Yeah.
And also some of those vineyards being pulled out or sold. Or that. But also I think a lot of the lower end Riverland vineyards, which grow an awful lot of grapes and go into the wine cask and the very low end Australian wine, the cost of water there and the cost of growing the grapes for the very small return they're getting, I think they're seriously considering their future as grape growers. It's largely unviable nowadays.
And you were mentioning that in some cases the people are selling their vineyards, but the water licenses are actually worth more than the vineyard, so people are purchasing those.
Yes.
So they can then farm cherry
vegetables
trees
or any sort of trees. Yeah, I mean, water is a fairly scarce resource out there. The irrigation systems, having said that, they just had an enormous amount of rain this year. So
right, okay. We'll see what happens.
But it's a one-off. I guess the change of climate, whether you want to debate that issue or not, that's not for me. But irrespective of that, there has been a lot of drought and a large shortage of water in those irrigation areas. So the lower return, more marginal industries have to be considered, whereas there's a large water requirement for fruit trees, in some areas rice, and the water licences and the amount you pay for water is quite a lot of money. So there's a lot of potential value in holding a water licence, which, as I mentioned, some people are selling and moving out of the industry.
Well, I do hope that you're not hit by all of these water licences and the like. Is less in Western Australia, or?
That's a very interesting issue at the moment. We don't have that same sort of irrigation principle where we have a big main river running down the middle. Margaret River, and I'll speak for Margaret River, but it's actually quite different once you get into Great Southern like Franklin. But we have quite a lot of rainfall. We have between 1.2 to 1.5 metres of rain a year, and that is all in the winter and spring, essentially all in the winter and spring months.
So it's not as much of an issue
no,
for you?
We have catchment dams,
Yep.
we catch an awful lot of water. Up until late, currently there's no fees for irrigating, but the water authorities are now registering all the dams because they want to monitor first and take control subsequently.
Yes, yeah.
At this stage, they just want to monitor the water resource and its usage out there. But I'm fairly sure at some stage they will start to endeavour the charges for the water, even though we've paid to build the dam wall and all the water falls on our land. And I don't disagree, actually. They sit there and say water is for everybody. I don't have a problem for that because that water will normally run down those little streams into larger rivers, into catchment areas for everyone's use and benefit. I don't have a problem with that, as long as they're realistic and reasonable about it as well.
Well,
Otherwise, we'll rule the system.
Thank you very much for joining us today at Good Food Revolution.
My pleasure.
Real pleasure to have you in Toronto, your very first time. And we look forward to catching up with you perhaps in February of next year.
You've got my card, I've got your card. It'll be easy.
Now you're really going to regret that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.